TBC, what's the deal? Now, a lot of fans, they keep asking me about this, and I've done videos about this. I actually did my first video about this in 2011 when I spoke about this. But in this era, we know that Wladimir Klitschko and Vitali Klitschko. Well, we know Vitali, he retired 2012, but this whole Klitschko era, people ask me who was the better of the two Klitschkos. When you look at the numbers, if you want to go by numbers and say who dominated, I mean, by far it's going to be Wladimir, right? 18 successful title defenses, even if you want to go back early in his career when he defended that WBO title 5 times. So we're talking 23 successful defenses of a world title. Vitali, 11 defenses of the WBC and 2 of the WBO. So 13 defenses. But the one thing I'll say is this: I appreciate the Klitschko era for it being 2 brothers that dominated one division. So I give them credit for that, and that's how I look at this era. If you want to say that, before Klitschko lost to Fury, if you want to say that he was the most dominant fighter of that, those 3 years from 2012 to 2015, I'm fine with that. But I just can't say that Wladimir was the best fighter post Lennox Lewis. I don't feel comfortable saying that Wladimir is, just solely based on his title defenses, because to me, Vitali Klitschko was the better of the 2 brothers. I just think stylistically he was the better of 2 brothers. I think just mentally he was probably a little bit more mentally tough than Wladimir. Now it's hard to gauge this. Only way you can do it is by looking at fights and looking at how each guy adapted to certain situations in the ring. Now, a lot of people, they like to get on the fact that, well, Vitali Klitschko always fought Vladimir's guys that beat him. And, well, if you want to be technical about it, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Wladimir was the first one to fight one of Klitschko's guys that beat him first. And it was Chris Bird. Now, he was winning the Chris Bird fight. Had he just continued to fight and lost the last 3 rounds 10-9, he would have still won that fight against Bird. Vitali chose to quit on his stool. Whatever. All right, so Wladimir later was the one that beat Bird. You know what I mean? So with that said, though, I mean, Wladimir, yes, he did beat Bird, but Bird wasn't beating the hell out of Vitali Klitschko, but when Vlad lost to Corey Sanders, he got bum rushed. He got beat up that fight. And then Vitali came and beat him up. And then even with the Samuel Peters situation, I know that although I had Wladimir winning, but it was a very close fight, and Wladimir went down a few times in that fight. Vitali came through and beat him up, and then I believe Peter fought Wladimir again after that. But to me, and then if you break down the resume, just look at what they've done. Wladimir Klitschko, he has fought, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 undefeated opponents. Pianata, Marius Wack, Jennings, Povetkin, Pulev, Calvin Brock. Y'all remember Calvin Brock? The boxing banker, I remember him. Solden Brighamov, guys with 1 loss, Eddie Chambers, David Hay, Tony Thompson. He was a unified champ. I mean, he unified the WBO, WBA, IBF in 2011. I mean, I have to give him props for that, man. But around 2011, 2012, although they're brothers and I wasn't expecting them to fight, that would have really let me know whose era it was. Because no matter what Wladimir did, just like his 18 title defenses stick out to me, Vitali Klitschko's fight against Lennox Lewis sticks out to me. Although, it was a stoppage win for Lennox, so on and so forth. Okay, cool. But I know what I watched that night. And the judges were thought the same thing that I seen. I had Vitali up 58-56, just like the judges did. And I thought Lennox was starting to gas a little bit. But I can also say that it looks like Lennox was starting to hurt Vitali a little bit. So who knows what would have happened. But I had Vitali winning that fight, man. That sticks out to me. Now, Vitali himself, he has fought some undefeated fighters: Manuel Charr, Aliana Solis, Kevin Kingpin Johnson, Chris Arreola, Timo Hoffman. His one-loss opponents at the time he fought him: Herbie Hyde when he won that WBO title, Chris Bird when he fought him when he was one loss, Kirk Johnson, although a 250-pound Kirk Johnson. Kirk Johnson was a guy I used to keep an eye on in the late 90s. I liked him when he was more around that 225, 230, but he fought an out-of-shape Kirk Johnson. Not his fault, though. Juan Carlos Gomez, Thomas Adamek, some good fighters. They were one-loss fighters when he fought them. You know, so, and if you want to throw in guys like Corey Sanders, who had 2 losses, but he beat Wladimir, power puncher. Danny Williams, when Danny Williams was really formidable. And you want to throw in Shannon Briggs, this guy he beat. Those guys had 2 or more losses, but still good, solid competition. But Vitali to me was just a more mentally tough guy. We can go back and forth with the numbers, and the numbers do favor Wladimir. We can go back and forth with the numbers, but I forgot to mention Samuel Peter and Ezequiel Castillo were undefeated fighters for Wladimir too. So he fought a lot of undefeated fighters. Samuel Peter, Ezequiel Castillo. And that Castillo fight, that's one of the best times I've seen Wladimir as far as moving on his feet, being fluid as a fighter, using his jab and setting up the right hand. That's probably one of his most, in my opinion, impressive fights as far as the way he fought the fight. You can say, oh, well, it was against Castillo, but it was just the way he fought and how fluid as a fighter he looked. He looked very good in that fight. Similar, kind of like how he looked against Pulev, but he looked really good in that fight. But undefeated fighters, Peter, Castillo, Pianata, Wack, Jennings, Povetkin, Pulev, Calvin Brock, and Brighamov. That is impressive, man. Regardless of what you think of those opponents, that's really impressive. But I will go with Vitali, man. Now, this would be like, I will go with Vitali, but this is kind of like not knowing who the best guy was, and it kind of just irritates me a little bit as a fan because I really want to know who was the #1 guy, and we'll never know. We will never know, because even when Vlad had the WBO, WBA, and the IBF, Vitali had the WBC. So, and some of you can say, well, Vitali has came out and said that his brother would have beat him. I mean, it's his little brother. Of course, he's gonna hype his little brother, man. I expect him to say things like that, but I think Vitali beats the hell out of Wladimir Klitschko. I think he beats his ass. Just his style, I think he's the better fighter than his brother. You could say his brother, when people say his brother is more athletic, I never got why they said that. How is he more athletic? What, his physique? He's more cut. He's more athletic looking because of his physique and his build. But what makes you think he's just more athletic? Like, how? I don't understand how. Like, to me, Vitali has better, he moved on his feet better. He had quicker hands, in my opinion. He bent at his waist and wasn't as stiff up top. To me, he was a more fluid fighter than his brother. So I don't get more athletic. I don't know. Maybe Wladimir can beat him in a foot race or something. I'm not sure what you mean by when people say he was more athletic, when I thought Vitali was a more fluid of the 2 fighters. Yeah, man, I mean, I just couldn't imagine. Could you imagine in the 70s if it was, Muhammad Foreman and George Foreman were brothers and they didn't, and they didn't fight, or Lennox Holyfield and Evander Holyfield never fought? Like, that would have sucked, man. It just would have sucked. So that's the only thing that I have to say about the Klitschko era, is they didn't get the fight. I wouldn't expect them to fight their brothers, but I'm just going to appreciate the era for 2 brothers able to dominate for a long stretch of time. I'm just going to appreciate it for that. But as far as who was the #1, I don't know. If you want to go by the numbers, I guess you can say Wladimir. By the eye test and who I think will win, I'm going to go Vitali Klitschko. But I guess it's one of those questions that, we'll be debating for years to come. But I'm going to appreciate it for the brothers together and what they did during that time dominating the division. But I'll never know who was the #1 guy. YTBC, I'm out.